Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's Select Science webinar titled The Importance of Point-of-Care Testing in Pediatrics. My name is Dora Wells, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. So I'm delighted to be joined by Patty Hezel, Point-of-Care Coordinator at the Children's Hospital and Medical Centre, Omaha. In today's webinar, Patty will discuss the benefits of point-of-care testing in pediatrics, explore the challenges of collection and testing pediatric specimens, and describe the impact of point-of-care testing on the workflow of pediatric settings. After the presentation, we'll move on to our question and answer session. Please feel free to ask any questions for the Q&A session at any time during the webinar. You can submit your question in the text box below the presentation slides. And don't forget that you're entitled to PACE and accent credits upon completion of the webinar and your evaluation of the session. You will be automatically redirected at the end of the webinar to download your certificate of attendance and access your credits. Now, without further delay, I'd like to hand it over to our speaker for today's presentation.
Thank you, Dora. My name is Patty Hezel, and I am here to talk to everyone about the importance of point-of-care testing in pediatrics. I am the point-of-care coordinator at Children's Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, and I am here to talk about how point-of-care works in pediatrics. We might all be surprised to know that some of the biggest things in point-of-care testing is not necessarily so much the devices. They have come a very long way. They're quite foolproof, but it's more of the relationships and the education and helping the understanding develop in the users who are now using these devices at the bedside. We're going to look at how point-of-care testing benefits the care of the children that we give. We're going to look at some of the problems that happen in point-of-care testing. And we're going to also talk a lot about working with the people who are running these devices at the bedside. We can start off by saying that point-of-care testing is great for pediatrics. When testing is done at the bedside, it is a huge plus. It is a fact that kids get really sick and then they get better even faster. And this creates this huge need for a fast quality lab results, and point-of-care testing fills that need. Having testing right at the bedside, caregivers can diagnose faster so there is no delay in the course of treatment. This creates a need for fast quality lab results, and point-of-care testing fits that need. Having the testing right at the bedside, caregivers can diagnose faster so there is no delay in the course of treatment. With faster turnaround times, they can adjust the meds and the fluids on the fly. But mostly, it allows the caregiver to be right at the place where they need to be to care for the patient and the parents. All of these aspects of point of care supply better outcomes for the patients that we care for. As point of care coordinator, it is our job to bridge the gap between the laboratory world and everyone else, and they couldn't be further apart. We need to take our technically based knowledge and present it as patient-focused. When testing is put at the bedside, we now have nurses, CNAs, respiratory techs, and a variety of other professionals performing this testing. Most of these professionals, mainly nurses, are very patient care oriented and have never been taught the technical side of the lab testing. They see lab testing as the patient. MLS professionals see lab testing in the most intangible ways. Today, I would like to share my personal journey from the bench tech to point of care coordinator. I would like to talk about the differences between the nursing perspective and labs perspective. the knowledge base differences between the nursing and the lab's knowledge base, and how a change of attitude can really get you into some good graces. I would then like to share some tips that I picked up along the way that helped me in bridging the gap between these two professions. When I first started as a point of care coordinator, I needed to take a good look at all aspects of this job. My attitude was all off. I had no idea what nurses' priorities were, and I had to realize that the knowledge base between these two worlds were very different. I have a sister who is a nurse in a small town. After I started working in the lab, it didn't take me long to realize that when we talked shop, she had no idea of what I was saying. And I could see that her concerns about lab testing were nowhere near what mine were. Let's just say I had to learn to talk nurse very quickly, or Thanksgiving was going to turn into a food fight. Doing what nurses do, doing what sisters do, we taught each other about the two different worlds. When she was asked to help her lab by doing phlebotomy, she struggled at first because putting in an IV is completely different than a venipuncture. We talked about this, and I told her some things that I learned in phlebotomy. I told her, it's not what you see, it's what you feel. I showed her places where capillary beds were rich so you could get a good capillary specimen. I told her to make sure the bevel of the needle has to be up. And a good hint was to put their little sleeve under the tourniquet so that it doesn't pinch. This is actually great for both pediatrics and adults. Because she had these little tricks of the trade, she became really good at drawing blood, and her small town lab really does appreciate her help. When the point of care position came up at my lab, the director made sure I knew about it and wanted me to apply. She told me even my phone calls to the nurses were always far more effective, and there was less drama because, thanks to my sister, I had the inside knowledge to the nursing world. I already knew what they struggled to understand because I went through it with my sister. And all of this got me thinking that nurses don't get the same science education as lab professionals do. I remembered in college, way back in college, that some nurses were taking the 100 level classes while I was taking the 300 and 400 level. That doesn't mean they couldn't cut it. It means they didn't really need to know details about it. They had bigger fish to fry. The MLS students learned a more focused skill set, and we are here to supply the team with that expertise. Thus, it's described as an auxiliary service that we provide. The lack of this specialized knowledge to the nurses can create some waves when they are told that they need to redraw a specimen because they contaminated it or didn't get enough. Then add to point of care, not only do they have their collection issues, they get told there's also processing problems, delivering the specimen onto the card problems, reporting problems, and something else that cannot go quite right. Many times I've been asked, why? And then I turn on the tech talk. Soon they realize that they are getting into deep water and their understanding is not quite there. One of the biggest things that has helped me become a better point of care coordinator was when I changed my attitude about the nursing staff. As a bench tech, I thought, why are they so obstinate? Why don't they just do what I say? Why the drama? Are they dumb or what? No, they are not dumb. Especially in the pediatric world. They are fiercely protective of their patients. They see those little faces every day and know what they go through. And they'll work themselves to the brink of exhaustion for these little guys. They have to make sure everything gets done on the care plan. They have to work with pharmacy, organize with radiology, schedule with the OR, and let alone make sure the pumps and the lines are working as they should. They have to make sure the patient gets fed, given their meds, and comfort, not only to the patient, but also to the parents. Plus, they support all the other nurses. In addition to that, we have to remember these kids basically have their well-being, if not their lives, in our nurses' hands. When their patient hurts, our nurses hurt. Our nurses feel for the kiddo whose mom and dad are never there. They witness the fights that can happen when parents are under stress or one of them has to be removed from the premises. They take the brunt of parents' stress as they want their children to get better. They take the brunt of a doctor screaming orders when a kiddo crashes. And then they are back to stable. The doctor leaves, but the nurse stays and cares for that patient to keep them stable. They answer endless questions and do all that is asked for them while keeping up on competencies, continuing education, and hospital functions. This adds up. And most of it is dealing with what laboratorians like to avoid like the plague: people. All sorts of people and all the stress that people bring. When I sit down and talk with my bedside users to do their annual competencies, I hear stories from an eyewitness perspective, and it really keeps me humble and thankful for what I have in my life. I'm very proud of my 300 to 400 bedside users, and I have learned a lot from them. Maybe now I've become fiercely protective of them. And this didn't take long to change once I got to know more about their roles and responsibilities. And I started letting them know that I see their world and I respect what they do, and I want to help them as best as I can. And once they knew this, they really started opening up. We really started to build a relationship. I even have a couple of users that come to the lab just for a few minutes to escape that craziness. Oh, and to pick up a few supplies. That's their excuse. It has taken me some time to build this rapport. They now know me, and they know that they can safely vent, laugh, and let it all out and get it all back together with me until they have to go face it again. Most have let me be a part of their world. We use a device called an epoch, and I'm lovingly known as Epoch Patty. Some of people don't even know my last name. I love being Epoch Patty. It's super funny, and I even get called this outside of the lab. I once even heard it called out when I was walking around the hardware store. Building this relationship has not always been easy, and I have different levels of relationship with each user. I have found some ways to help create and foster this relationship. The biggest one is being approachable. When I am out in the hospital, I smile. I say hi to everyone. I introduce myself and tell them where I'm from. I ask how their day's going. I tell them I need help and if they can direct me in the right direction. When I need to talk one-on-one with a user that has broken protocol, I avoid saying things like, "You did this wrong." I approach it as, "I found this result in the computer and it needs to go to the chart. The computer says that you ran a bedside glucose at a certain time on a certain meter, and it has the ID of blah, 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 blah. It didn't work because that ID is not the number needed by the computer system. Can you help me out so I can get this onto the chart?" I mean, they already know that they did it wrong. but it comes across not as a personal attack, but as a problem that we need to solve together. They also get the education this way, and it helps them so that they don't do it again. And if I don't have a chance to do that kind of education, I always say, it's my job to make sure you know that blah, 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 blah. But I do educate, and I educate all the time, but I always educate with a smile. I pretty much approach any situation as this is their world, and I'm just living in it. Even though the lab has its rules and regulations, and it's my job to see that they are followed, would you rather follow a dictator or a friend? And this leads me to my next point. When solving problems, I always make sure that they are part of the solution. They know their workflow. I present the problem and how it's not following a regulation and advise as they create their own solution to these problems. There will be much better acceptance to change if it comes from one of their own. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I don't use hard technical terms with my people. I feel it comes across as maybe superior. I just want to be real, earthy, and grounded. I don't want to intimidate or belittle. The lab is filled with technical and professional verbiage, gross hemolysis, anticoagulant ratios, calibration, verification, indication, and so on. Many nurses haven't ever been told the difference between clotting and hemolysis. Much of what our technical terms describe completely intangible things. So if you want our users to perform great testing and understand the intangible issues that create these inaccurate results, you have to make the intangible tangible. I explain hemolysis in this way. Red cells are wussies, and their membranes are super flimsy, and they are filled with lots of potassium. When they are put under pressure, they will explode like pop rocks. So if you're pulling hard on a syringe to get a specimen off of a line, if you're squeezing the snot out of a finger, or if you're shaking a tube of blood, pop rocks. And then you're measuring all that potassium that's inside a cell. Same for the inaccuracy in lactates. Lactic acid is what makes your muscles tight. And when you get a massage, as we all love massages, you squish the lactic acid out and you feel better. So think about when you're using a tourniquet. Have to use excessive restraint because your kiddo is thrashing about, are squeezing because it's a capillary draw. Muscles are being squeezed, and it will cause a lactate result to be inaccurate. You have to make the technical connection to their everyday tangible world. I also try to be available to do what I need to get done on their time. I make sure they know what hours I'm available, and if I need to reorganize my day or come in a little early, I'll do my best to do it. It can be a lot of interruptions, but I know that's just part of my job. I understand that their world can change on a dime. When they know that I respect that aspect of their job, they are very much open to more communication, and we are able to accomplish the task together. As I said before, when they know that you are trying to understand, they are much more apt to let you in and you can work together. I ask about their day. If you know a specific case or a patient, I ask how they are doing. I ask how they do things with their patients. I find the world of all of the lines fascinating. When I go to the floor, I can see some kids have up to 5 or 6 different lumens, 2 to 3 different lines in them, plus IVs. How do they keep it all straight? I have even asked the nursing educator if there is some sort of chart, a class, or something that could give me the Reader's Digest version of indwelling lines. I feel I can be much more helpful if I know how all of that works. I love talking to our transport team. Some of the things they have to do come straight out of Grey's Anatomy. I'm even trying to go on a run with them to help me understand what they do in the back of an ambulance. I ask a lot of questions about their worlds, and they appreciate that I want to know. When it comes to training these folks, I train them at a pretty high level. I expect them to not only be able to run the analyzer and get quality results, they are expected to understand how it works. They have to perform the maintenance, and they need to be able to do troubleshooting. I tell them this is the kind of faith I have in them, and that I believe that they can do this. Sometimes they don't get the choice if they are going to perform bedside testing or not. They're just told they have to do so. And there was some duress at my job, and a doctor left, and there were nurses that left with him. They were hired at another hospital that didn't have our bedside device with them. When that hospital finally broke down and got this device, my nurses were telling them that they need to work like this or they need to work like that. The point of care coordinator finally called me to get me some help to figure out what they were saying. I was glad to help her understand. And they had it down pretty good. And that was all due to the level at which I set my expectation. It shouldn't matter if it's a CNA or a perfusionist. They should all be able to understand and do the work. And now, there's a whole different set of questions that come up depending on who you're training. But at the end, they should all get there and be able to run the device. And sometimes you're surprised at who runs, understands, and troubleshoots these devices the best. So think about when you walk into an X-ray room or an OR. Everything is a mystery, and you either want to touch it all or not at all. That's what I think new users are feeling when it comes to learning the new devices that they are expected to run. So I feel that most of the time, they're a little uncertain of the whole thing. To help them get a good feel for testing and all the aspects that can cause the problems, I make them come to the lab to get trained. I want them to see that we really are people in the lab and they just don't drop a specimen in the tube station and results magically appear on the chart. I do all I can to help them understand our world in the lab. I embrace my science geek and I tell them about things in the laboratory, like the centrifuge, or they call it the spinny thing. If they really want to and have time, I've been known to show them cells under the microscope, what our chemistry analyzer reagents look like. And I explain that hemolysis can actually be seen in the fresh frozen plasma that they give to their patients. I really am a science geek, and I love to show it off. It's just cool. And I'm hoping that this helps them feel that they are a part of this whole testing world. You are not alone in your struggle to bridge the gap of the lab and point of care testing. We have all experienced that blank stare while training, the lack of interest, and being told that those details aren't important. Much of the lab regulations are quite daunting and confusing. If you don't have the background, then the why questions just don't get answered. Some of those questions are really technical. Understanding that a tiny change in collection, handling, or performing a test can make patient results unreliable. It's common for nurses to think that the device is acting up. It's hard for them to understand that all aspects of testing can cause errors. Here are some of the approaches that I use to help bridge this gap and to help them understand all of these pre-analytical, post-analytical, analytical phases can affect their result. For collections, when they're collecting the specimen, I tell them garbage in, garbage out. You have to have a good collection to get good results. We have different sizes of pokers to draw capillary blood. To help them remember the size they need, our colors of the pokers are navy blue for fingers and orange for heel draws. The colors of the Denver Broncos. Sorry if you're a fan. For the process of squeezing a finger instead of saying milking the finger, I tell them, pull the finger off the hand and stop sliding your fingers down theirs. Of course, I'm always showing them at the same time too. For heel pokes, I say it's not a stress ball squeeze. It's more like your thumb and index finger are biting the heel. For quality control, to help them remember when our device is doing its quality control that it does each and every time we run a test, I tell them it's whenever you use a card. They have to use their ID card to log in, and the reagent card, when it's placed in the device, is the second time that it does QC. That's easy for them to remember. It's just the cards. When it comes to running a test, I quote my dear old dad. If you have time to do it over, you have time to do it right the first time. So take that deep breath. Make sure that you are giving the device every chance that it can to give you a good result. Our bedside glucoses you can't overfill. So I tell them it's a 3-step method. Number 1, touch the stick to the specimen. Number 2, keep it there and let it fill. And number 3, then remove the stick. For reporting, a lot of our things are connected to Wi-Fi. One of our Wi-Fi device icons is in a radar shape of a quarter circle. And to me, it kind of looks like a martini glass. And I tell them, if you drink martinis, things get fuzzy. And your connection gets fuzzy. And it may not be enough to get your result to the chart. So keep your martini glass full. Tell me a 25-year-old doesn't understand that. For all the competencies that are due, I make them come to the lab, and I use stuffed animals with armbands. Sometimes I give them the wrong patient on purpose just to see if they will catch it. I also am able to pull the errors that they ran the previous year. We talk about their errors and about the struggles that cause these errors. And I get stories where you hear them say, "Oh, I did that wrong. Patty's going to be mad at me for that." Or they say, "You better not do that wrong, or Patty, it's going to go on my review." And I tell them, "You guys don't get nasty grams from me. You get Patty grams." And they all seem to think that's pretty funny. When it comes to troubleshooting, For the bedside glucoses, I always say the first thing you do is dock it and rock it, and that's going to reset everything. So these are just a few of the antics that I use to help them remember and to help them make sense out of all those little things that can go wrong when you're doing a lab test. I promise, if you give the education and the energy and maybe a little pizzazz, they will never forget. The lab is a very, very different world. We have our own language and concerns. We work strictly within a set of rules that we do not deviate. And most of our problems we need to deal with, we can't even see them. We are a special type of people. And now we're going mobile. And we have to let other people into this world who may not be cut from this fabric that we are. I hope this presentation can help see that point of care does help in the pediatric setting. And I hope that we've shed some insight about the users that are not born lab people. I hope we've explored ways to reach these bedside users, and I hope my antics can help you help the outside world achieve good quality results for the patients they care for.
Great. Thank you for that interesting presentation, Patty. It's now time for the Q&A part of this session. And first, there'll be 3 polls appearing on your screen. So please help us evaluate the session by answering the 3 poll questions. You must do this as well in order to receive your PACE and accent credits upon completion of the webinar. And just a reminder to submit your questions for our speaker, and you can do so in the text box below the presentation slides. And now to kick us off with our first question, Patty, we have, you focused a lot on nursing. Have you had similar experiences with other types of end users, such as perfusionists, EMTs, and what advice can you give when working with them?
That is a really great question. And these groups are very, very diverse. And oftentimes I have to train them when they're all together too. But nursing, they have their focus of what they're looking on. But some of the other auxiliary sciences, they have a more focus like lab does. And sometimes you have to change how you're training to make it work in their world. I find that too with like CNAs. They are so excited that they're going to get to participate in being able to really be a part of this kid's care, that they are very excited to do it. Respiratory therapists, they totally understand the importance of the results. So you do have to keep in mind what they know and how they're going to participate in this care when you're training them. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yes, great. Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, great answer there. The next question, I'll move on, is do you run neonatal bilirubin at the point of care in your facility?
Actually, we do not. We've done some research with the device. We do use it in our doctor's offices, but not at our hospital. It's more of a great screening device than a definitive device. And well, the ones I've looked at, I should say, there's a few out there. And we prefer to, with our clientele of our children, that we have the more definitive and run it in the lab. So no, we do not run at point of care.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for clarifying that one, Patty. The next question I've got here is, how many point of care devices do you manage?
Oh my goodness. Our end users really, really like our device, and I have about 100 devices that do the blood gas, chemates, lactate, glucose, all of the panel device that we have. I have about 100. And then we have just the single bedside glucose monitor that is waved. And I probably have a strong 60 or 70 of those. So I have quite a few devices. And then we have a few that are much smaller in numbers that we use more in the surgery in our cath lab area. We have an AVOX and a hemochrone.
Great, thanks for answering that one. And just a bit of a follow-on from there. How do you perform correlation among all of these devices?
Oh, that is so tricky. And I'm not even sure we do it very well because there's just so many of them. The smaller ones, we actually do a material through CAP, through CAP, and we're able to submit it. And it's a good way to know that the user is using it well and, getting the same result as everybody else, and that our devices are matching. The bigger ones, we go with just quality control. And you have to define what says, what they, your ranges and what you're going to say that they match. And we keep it simple. We go with in range of the manufacturer. So we have one device that we compare to all of our laboratory instrumentation, and then we compare all of our other devices to that device through the quality control that we run. And sometimes you just have to go run it. And sometimes you can get lucky and it's used in validating a new lot number of something or the such. But it is really, really tricky to get to all of them. But I do like to get to all of these devices just to make sure they're in good working order, and to make sure that they're, sometimes our end users hang on to them probably longer than they should. And just to make sure they're in good shape. So mostly through quality control, though some of ours, we do use the CAP material.
Okay, great. Thank you for that insight there. So moving on to the next question, how has COVID impacted your nursing staff levels?
Oh my goodness. COVID hit about the same time that we opened a new wing to our hospital. And so we got down to some real skeleton shifts for a while. And it was hard. And those guys worked really, really hard and kept up. But now we have gone on this monstrous hiring spree. And that's also tricky too, because you have all these new users and they're getting all this experience, and what causes experience? Errors. So we are monitoring more and working more with these new people that we've hired. But I think nursing wise, or just employee wise, we've kind of made the curve and we're kind of getting back to the place where we need to be. But yeah, it was hard for a while, just because the demand and their expertise was needed so badly. In the pediatric world, we probably didn't even see it as hard as in the adult world. Kids kind of handled COVID a little better, I think, than adults did. So what we saw was horrible. I can't imagine what some of the adult hospitals saw.
Great, thanks a lot for that one, Patty. And the next question here, an attendee is saying, I am being asked to start a new point of care program with my transport team. What would you recommend that I look at when looking for an instrument?
Oh, transport is very, very tricky. That's a great question. I don't think I could probably advise on a specific device. I just don't have the experience with many different devices, only pretty much ours. But you have to make sure the mobility of it is really good. You have to, the users have to be able to use it quickly. It has to be very user friendly. And you might want to, I feel the best thing would be just to get a couple and get those specific users, get their hands on them and see what they think. Just the room, the ability that it's so different when you're in an ambulance or if you're in a fixed wing or a helicopter. It's just an entirely different atmosphere that you can't even imagine. I was lucky enough to be able to actually see our helicopter, and it made a lot more sense with what we do and with what they do. But to specifically offer up a device, I probably can't.
Great, no, thanks a lot for that one. And the next question is, do you have your devices connected through middleware? And if so, how important is that system and its functionality in your day-to-day life as a point of care coordinator?
Yes, we do have them in a middleware, and it is absolutely my lifeline. I could not do my job without that middleware. You see how many they're running, who's doing the running. You can filter things out and see who needs to maybe have a little more training, because you can see who's doing the errors and how often. Maybe department issues, you can narrow down specific errors. I use my middleware so much. We do end of the month reports. I generate that kind of information out of them monthly, and being able to see pretty much what the end user sees when they're having troubles. You can even see on timing to make sure that they're sending them appropriately. It is basically my lifeline, and I could not do my job without the middleware and the things that I can see for it.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for that one. And the next question is, what is the best piece of advice you would give to a new point of care coordinator?
Cut yourself some slack. You got to build your program with your users. Like I was saying in this webinar, we are cut from different fabric, and to understand their needs and their thoughts, and to help them understand the rules and regulations. I really found that most of my end users really do want to follow the rules. They just don't know what the rules are. And as lab people, we stick to those rules just word for word. And sometimes you have to loosen up a little. Sometimes you have to really enforce what they're saying. But really try to just find how it's going to work and how it's going to work with your group. And oftentimes I find what works for our inpatient isn't going to work for our surgery. And you have to just make sure each area is doing the best they can with their workflow. One single piece of advice, I don't think I can narrow it down to that, but maybe I stick with what I said at the very, very beginning. Cut yourself a little slack, because mistakes are going to be made, and you just have to say, okay, that's not working. Let's try something else. And you'll find the fit. I'm sure you will.
Great, that's some great advice there, Patty. Thanks a lot for that one. And the next question, when you prepare for CAP inspections, how do you prep the point of care end users?
Oh boy, they do not like this at all. This is when they really have to hammer down on the rules. And I probably start a solid 6 to 8 months, start sending emails, start warning them of some of the big things that an inspector is going to look for. And we have it set up that we have educators in each of our departments, and that's normally who I work with. So I will start out with telling them this is going to happen, this is what people are going to look for. And then a few weeks later, I'll send out another one. And then a few weeks later after that, I actually go to the floor and kind of do a mini little inspection myself and show them what I found. And most of the time, they start realizing that this is going to be pretty important if I keep talking about it over and over and over and over again. But when you have 400 users, 500 users, it's hard to get to all of them. Most of our end users are 12-hour people. Excuse me. And, a week, they may not even get a chance to read their emails or anything. And so you just have to start very early, warning them, telling them the big things that they need to look for, telling them what's the important things that they can ask each and every person, and then just know and have faith in your training that they'll come through for you. But I do that little mini mock one, and it really does open some eyes for them.
Great, thanks a lot for that. And when training new end users, what do you find that they struggle with most, and how do you help them overcome it?
That's a really good question. You're working with so many individual personalities. And as soon as you think that this group isn't getting this aspect of it, they turn around and prove you wrong. I would possibly say that it's the rules. Knowing they just aren't accustomed to following that set of rules, and they want a shortcut, and you just can't shortcut. And most of the time that's actually in the pre-analytical stage and in the collection, because they've done this for so long and they're so good at it. And it's like, yes, but anything, the minorest, tiniest little thing can change your results. And sometimes, like my dad used to say, you have to go to the school of hard knocks, and they just have to make the mistakes to really, really see what it is you're saying. And I feel that the best thing that you can do is to take that mistake that they made and correlate it to how it could have been done better. And that really is probably the best thing to show them how to make it run better. I think that's probably what I'll stick with.
Great, that was great advice there as well. Thanks a lot for that. And the next question, we have an attendee here who is just asking if you can sum up the benefits of point of care testing in pediatric.
Point of care has really brought our hospital a long way. And it's the confidence in the end users and the speed. Pediatrics is just, like I said at the very beginning, kids get sick really fast and they get better really fast. And, everything happens at a much faster pace at the pediatric world. So having that right there, that they can just, even if they can just get their results and see it at a glance and then move on and then finish up sending it or whatever later, that is a benefit to them because they feel better about it. They're not having to stop and answer phone calls. I would say that's the biggest thing. And then the next biggest thing would be quantity of blood drawn. When you get a chronic sick child, and I mean a kid who's in the hospital for 6 to 8 months, and they're little tiny, or they haven't even left the hospital since they've been born, you can only take so much blood from them. And you know, we don't want to transfuse our kids just because we're testing them. So point of care really, really fits the bill there with sample size. So that would probably, summation wise, would be sample collection, quality, I meant quantity, and the confidence of the user and the speed that they have to have that result.
Thanks, Patty. That was a great summary there. And the next question is, do you check for hemolysis in arterial blood gas samples?
We really don't. We run them. I'm so sorry, excuse me. It's a whole blood sample. So checking for hemolysis is really tricky. And the best cue you can go for that is your potassium value. If it's super high and you don't expect it to be, that would be the first thought that goes through my mind, is that my sample had a hard time being drawn. And like I said in the webinar, I tell my users, garbage in, garbage out. If you struggle getting that sample, start over. Give it another shot, because you're not going to get that great result.
Great, thanks a lot for that. And we have time for just a few more questions. So the first of those is, how often do your end users use proper sample collection techniques after training? And do you often find that retraining is required?
You know what? If you don't use it, you lose it. And if you don't take that training to heart, and you have to practice. If you don't get in there and draw the blood and do it, you're not going to get better. We let them get going, and we find it to be more of a confidence level. The end users are really good about judging whether the sample was good or not by the results. Excuse me. They're not really that great yet at knowing, as they're drawing it, whether it's going to come out good or not, or at least they're not telling me that they knew it was a bad sample and we're just going to try to run it anyway. Retraining, I think they catch on pretty quick that they got to get better at it. And with pediatrics, and like I said before, with the quantity that you draw, they kind of just they make do with what they get. Super accuracy is not first on their mind. They're shooting more for ballpark, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It seems to be just like the culture of what's going on right now. But they do get told about drawing. And I oftentimes tell them, just spend an hour with one of our phlebotomists, because our phlebotomists are amazing and they can give them the tricks, because that's where it's at, is to be able to know how to handle a phlebotomy that's going bad. Absolute retraining. We do a little bit. We talk about a lot. We talk about it a lot at their competencies, and I feel that's where we are able to offer up more advice when it comes to that. Yeah, that's
great. Thanks for that, Patty.
It's really hard to catch it.
Okay. And so the next question here is, does the lab get revenue for point of care tests? For example, blood gas tests performed by respiratory therapists?
I will tell you, this is not really my expertise on the billing side. most of the time, as a rule of thumb, if we pay for the reagent, if we pay for the device, we get the revenue. If they are purchasing all of that on their own, then they get the revenue.
Great,
May
thank
not
you.
sound super fair, but I think that's how it goes. But
Great.
Don't take my word for that one, but I think that's how it goes with our hospital.
Thanks a lot for that. I think we have time to just squeeze in one more quick question, and that is, how does e-learning integrate in the relation with point of care testing users?
Oh, I have a love-hate relationship with e-learning. Just with the pure numbers of people that we work with, it's a benefit on their side and on our side, because training does take a lot of time. And if it's e-learning, they can do it on their time. Not always sure all the best information gets through on e-learning. We kind of are in a cycle of having the e-learning, but they still come to us and work out the fine points. That's a really, really great question. And like I said, I like it and I don't like it at the same time, because you can't really get a good handle on what they take away from the e-learning session. And that's why we do make them come and do hands-on with us at the same time. And, I'm always a promoter of, you can't hear it enough.
Great, thanks for that, Patty. And there is one final question here, so I will just squeeze it in before we run out of time. And that is, how do you keep track of competencies for non-wave devices? Excel, paper, something else?
We actually have a program that we put these people into a certification, and it will automatically reassign the E part of the certification the next year. We run monthly reports on that. We make sure to reach out to the people who are not getting it done. It's always a fun time. And but if it wasn't for this device or this program that we have, I don't know if I could keep track of it all. I would have to have the most enormous Excel spreadsheet sheet ever.
Great. Thanks a lot for that one, Patty. And I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up there. So thanks again to Patty Hazel for today's informative discussion and presentation. And thank you to everyone joining us online and for your interesting questions. I hope you've all found this a worthwhile session. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me at editor@selectscience.net, and I'll follow up with your questions for Patty. And if you would like to listen again to today's webinar or invite a friend to listen, it will be available to watch on demand in a few days' time. And now, to claim your PACE and accent credits and your certificate of attendance, please wait to be automatically redirected and help us evaluate this session. Goodbye, and thank you once again for joining us.